Can I ask you something? Have you ever made one decision and almost immediately knew that your life was about to change and not in a good way? I have. And a few hours after that decision, I found myself sitting alone in a jail cell staring at a cold concrete wall. And I do remember thinking, how did I get here? But if I'm honest, that wasn't really the question. I knew exactly how I got there. The better question was, is this who I'm going to be for the rest of my life? Because that's what I'd started to believe. Not just that I had made bad decisions, but that I had become one. If you walked into that jail that night and you pulled up a chair and you looked at me in the eye and said, Chris, one day you're going to coach people for a living. You're going to help men and women rebuild their lives. You're going to stand in front of audiences. You're going to watch marriages heal. You're going to help business owners find clarity. You're going to spend your life helping people discover who they were created to become. I would have smiled, not because I believed you, but because I would have thought you had the wrong person. There was no evidence that future belonged to me. Every piece of evidence pointed in the opposite direction, really. And here's what I've learned. Most of us don't build our future based on possibility. We build it based on evidence. And that's where we get in trouble. Maybe your story doesn't include jail. Maybe it includes divorce, maybe addiction, maybe bankruptcy, maybe losing someone that you loved, maybe a business that failed, maybe years of anxiety, maybe growing up in a home where you never felt like you measured up. Maybe nobody even knows your story. But I would guess this. At some point, you've looked at your life and quietly wondered, is this just who I am? Not because you wanted to believe it, because after enough disappointments, it started feeling true. That's the moment I want to talk about today, because I think there's one lie that quietly shapes more lives than almost anything else. It's a lie so convincing that most people never really question it. I know I didn't. The lie is this: your past has already decided your future. It sounds logical. In fact, your brain is designed to believe it. Our minds are incredible pattern recognition machines. If something happens once, we remember it. If it happens 10 times, then we expect it. If we fail over and over, our brain stops saying you failed and it starts saying you're a failure. Notice the difference? One describes an event and the other defines a person. That's where everything changes. Because once your identity gets involved, your behavior usually follows. I see this all the time in coaching. Someone will say, oh, I'm just not disciplined. I usually ask, how do you come to that conclusion? Almost every time they tell me a story. I've quit every workout program. I've never been consistent. I always give up. I listen. And then I ask another question. Do those stories prove who you are, or do they simply describe what you've done? There's a difference, a huge difference. Because if behavior becomes identity, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to prove yourself right, even when it's hurting you. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I thought I was trapped by my circumstances. Looking back, I wasn't. I was trapped by the meaning I had attached to those. The jail cell wasn't the biggest prison I lived in. The biggest prison was believing that because I'd lived one kind of story, that I no longer had permission to live a different one. That belief is heavier than concrete. Bars can keep your body in one place, but beliefs can keep your future there way after those doors have opened. All right, hey, let's pause for a second. One of the things I love most is helping people discover what's holding them back, but then walking with them as they create this meaningful change in their lives. It's the reason I do what I do. If you've been enjoying the content and you're looking for more personalized guidance, I do offer coaching programs that help people gain clarity, build resilience, and just take those practical steps toward the life that they want. And for those of you who prefer learning at your own schedule, I do have the self-study course that's available so you can work through it at your own pace. You can learn more about it at coachbo.com. But for now, let's jump back in the video because we got a lot of important ground to cover still. Can I tell you something I've noticed too? The people who stay stuck usually aren't lacking ability. They're carrying a story they stopped questioning. Think about that. Every one of us has a narrator living inside of our head. He's constantly explaining life to us. This happened because that person treated you this way because you'll probably always struggle with. Most of the time, we never stop to ask, is that actually true? We just accept it. And once we've accepted it, we start living as if it's fact. Not because it is, because we've repeated it enough times that it feels familiar. And here's something I've learned the hard way: familiar and true are not the same thing. When I started rebuilding my life, I kept waiting for some huge breakthrough. I thought one day I'd wake up, I'd feel different, I'd think differently, I'd have more confidence, and then I'd finally start becoming the man I wanted to be. Well, that's not what happened, not even close. What happened was much less exciting, let me tell you. I but I kept one promise to myself, and then another, then another. Most of the time, nobody applauded. Very few noticed, but most days it didn't even feel like progress. It just felt like work, ordinary work, the kind of work that people usually overlook because it's not dramatic enough to post online or talk about. But here's what I couldn't see at the time. Those small decisions weren't changing my circumstances, yet they were changing me. And eventually, the person I was becoming started making decisions the old version of me never would have made. That's when my life began to change. Not all at once. It was little by little, and it was from the inside out. That's why I don't believe resilience begins when life falls apart. I think resilience is built long before anyone realizes they need it. It's built in those ordinary moments: keeping your word, choosing honesty, owning your mistakes, forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it, getting up when you'd rather quit, doing the right thing when no one's watching. Those moments seem insignificant until the day life tests everything that you've been building. Then you realize those ordinary choices were preparing you for the extraordinary challenges all along. So let me ask you something here. What if the greatest obstacle in your life isn't your past? What if it isn't your circumstances? What if it isn't even the people who hurt you? What if it's the story you've been telling yourself about all those things? Because if that's true, there's incredible hope. Stories can be rewritten, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by refusing to let it write the ending. And that brings me to the question that changed my life. Not while I was in jail, not while I was struggling, not but while I was rebuilding. A question so simple that most people overlooked it. Yet it's powerful enough to completely change the direction of your life. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? I started asking, who do I want to become because this happened? That question changed everything. I want you to think about that question for a minute. Who do I want to become because this happened? Not how do I get my old life back? Not how do I make the pain disappear? Not even how do I fix this as quickly as possible? Who? Who am I becoming? Because here's something I wish someone would have explained to me years ago. Life is always changing you, always. Every disappointment, every success, every relationship, every conversation, every victory, every setback, every one of those experiences leaves something behind. The question isn't whether life is shaping you, it's whether you're paying attention to how it's shaping you. I remember getting out and thinking that if I could just fix my circumstances, that everything else would just fall into place. Such as if I could just get a job, I'd feel better. If I could make some money, I'd finally have confidence again. If people started trusting me, I'd trust myself. If enough things on the outside changed, surely I'd become a different person. But that's not what happened. In fact, I discovered something that completely flipped my thinking upside down. Changing your circumstances doesn't automatically change you. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed, like, for instance, two people can get the exact same promotion. One becomes grateful and the other becomes arrogant. Two people lose their job. One discovers a new purpose, the other spends years bitter about what happened. Two marriages, they go through a difficult season. One couple actually grows closer, the other grows farther apart. Same circumstances, just completely different people. So maybe the circumstance isn't the deciding factor. Maybe it's what happens inside the person while they're living through it. One of the greatest lessons I learned is that your mind is constantly asking questions, even when you don't realize it. And whatever question your mind is asking, it's searching for an answer. If your question is, why does this always happen to me? Your brain will go to work. It'll start collecting evidence. Remember when that relationship ended? Remember when that business failed? Remember when they betrayed you? Remember when you embarrass yourself? See, it always happens. Your brain isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to be helpful. It's answering the question that you asked. But what happens when you ask a different question? What if instead of why me, you ask, what can this teach me? Or what's still within my control? Or maybe my favorite, who do I need to become to move through this well? Now your brain starts searching for completely different evidence. It begins noticing opportunities instead of only obstacles. It starts looking for growth instead of proof that you're stuck. The circumstance hasn't changed, but your direction has. And direction is far more important than speed. I think that's something our culture has backwards. Everybody wants quick results, quick success, quick healing, quick confidence, quick transformation. But nature doesn't work that way. Think about the strongest tree that you've ever seen. It didn't become strong during the sunshine. It became strong because year after year, storm after storm, its roots kept growing deeper. Nobody celebrates roots. They're hidden. Nobody takes pictures of the roots. Nobody compliments the roots. But when the wind starts blowing, roots suddenly become the only thing that matters. People are exactly the same way. Most of the work that makes you resilient is happening where no one can see it. Can I tell you something that took me years to understand? I used to think confidence came first. I thought if I could just become more confident, then I'd finally take action. Well, that's backwards. Confidence rarely comes before action. Confidence is usually the result of action. Think about riding a bike. Nobody feels confident before they learn. You wobble, you fall, you scrape your knee, you get frustrated. Then one day, almost without realizing it, you're riding. Well, what changed? You didn't suddenly become fearless, you became familiar. And familiarity slowly replaced fear. That's how confidence works. When people tell me, Chris, I wish I had more confidence, I usually smile because I understand exactly what they mean. But confidence isn't what they're actually looking for. They're looking for evidence, evidence that they can trust themselves. Think about that. Every time you say you're going to do something and you actually do it, you leave yourself evidence, evidence that you're becoming dependable, evidence that you're becoming disciplined, and even evidence that you're becoming trustworthy, not just to other people, but to yourself. And that's where real confidence begins, not in your feelings, but it's in your integrity. I remember there were mornings when the last thing I wanted to do was get out of bed. Not because I was lazy, it was because rebuilding is exhausting. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Rebuilding trust is exhausting. Rebuilding your finances is exhausting. Rebuilding your health is exhausting. Rebuilding a marriage, your reputation, your faith, none of it happens overnight. There were days I wondered if all the effort was accomplishing anything. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there now. You're doing all the right things, but it feels like nothing's changing. Could I encourage you with something that kept me going? Progress and visible results are not the same thing. There were things changing inside of me months before anyone could even see them. I was becoming more patient, more honest, more disciplined, more dependable. No one complimented those things. No one could even see them. But eventually, they became impossible to hide because who you are on the inside always finds its way to the outside. I think that's one of the greatest misunderstandings about personal growth. People become obsessed with outcomes, the new job, the bigger paycheck, the healthier body, the stronger marriage. Those things are wonderful, but they're not where transformation starts. Transformation starts with becoming the kind of person who can sustain those things. Because if your character doesn't grow with you, with your opportunities, eventually your opportunities will expose your character. And that's why I care so much about who you're becoming than what you're accomplishing. Accomplishments can be taken away. Character goes with you everywhere. And so let me ask you another question. If no one ever applauded your progress, would you still keep becoming the person you know that you're capable of being? That's a hard question because eventually the crowd goes home. The likes stop coming, the compliments fade, and you're left with one person, the one staring back at you in the mirror. Can you trust them? Can you respect them? Can you believe what they say? Because if you can, life gets a whole lot less intimidating. Not because life gets easier, but because you've become stronger. There's another lesson I had to learn, and honestly, this one might be the hardest of them all. I had to stop trying to change my life and start changing the man who was living it. Because once that changed, everything else began changing with it. Can I tell you something that took me a long time to understand? Pain doesn't automatically make you stronger. We've all heard that phrase: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't think that's entirely true. I've watched pain make people stronger, and I've watched pain make people better. I've watched pain deepen compassion, and I've watched pain harden hearts. I've watched pain create purpose, and I've watched pain convince people to give up on life altogether. So pain itself isn't the deciding factor. The question is, what are you allowing pain to produce in you? I don't say that casually. I've lived long enough to know there are people watching this who are carrying things I can't even imagine. Some of you are grieving. Some of you are exhausted. Some of you are trying to hold a family together while quietly falling apart inside. And some of you are wondering if you'll ever feel like yourself again. I don't want to minimize any of that. Pain is real. Loss is real. Trauma is real. There are things that happen in life that leave scars. Some of those scars stay with us forever. I get it. But here's what I've discovered. A scar tells a story. It reminds you something happened. It doesn't get to decide who you become because it happened. There's a difference there. When I look back at my own life, I can see moments when I wish that would have never happened. There are chapters I'd never choose to relive. There are people I hurt, people who hurt me, years they'll never get back. If I could erase those moments, part of me would want to. But another part of me knows something. If I erase those chapters, I'd also erase the lessons they taught me. I wouldn't understand grace the way I do today. I wouldn't appreciate freedom the way I do today. I wouldn't know how to sit across from someone who's struggling because I would have never known what felt like to struggle myself. Sometimes the things that you're most ashamed of become the very thing God uses to help someone else heal. Think about that. Not because he caused it, but because he refused to waste it. That realization changed the way I looked at my past. One day I realized I had spent years asking God to remove things when maybe he was trying to develop something: patience, humility, wisdom, perseverance, compassion, character. Those things rarely grow when life is easy. They usually grow when life forces us to become someone we've never been before. And if I'm honest, I wouldn't have chosen that process. But looking back, I am grateful for it. I want to ask you another thing here. Who would you be today if every difficult thing had been removed from your life? Seriously, think about it. Would you have the same compassion, the same maturity, the same appreciation? Would you even have the same perspective? I don't think I would. That doesn't mean I wanted the pain. It means I can finally see that pain wasn't the author of my story. It becomes one of my teachers. There's a big difference there. One of the biggest shifts I ever made happened when I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I started asking, how can this prepare me? Those are completely different conversations. One keeps you looking backwards, but the other starts pulling you forward. And that's what resilience does. It doesn't pretend yesterday didn't happen. It simply refuses to let yesterday become tomorrow. I also think this is where people misunderstand healing. See, healing doesn't mean pretending something never happened. Healing isn't forgetting. Healing isn't acting like you're okay when you're not. No, healing is reaching the place where the memory no longer controls your decisions, where the wound stops becoming your identity, where you can tell your story without your story telling you, right? I remember the first time I could talk about prison without shame being the loudest voice in the room. That was a milestone, not because my past disappeared, but because my identity had finally become stronger than that. That's freedom. You know what fascinates me? The strongest people I've ever met usually don't think they're strong. They're just faithful. They keep showing up. They keep loving. They keep forgiving. They keep growing. They keep taking one more step. They don't call it resilience. They call it doing what needed to be done. Maybe that's why they're resilient. They stopped chasing a feeling and they started living with conviction. There's something beautiful about that. I think that's also why purpose matters so much. Without purpose, pain feels random. With purpose, pain becomes part of the larger story. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it does give it meaning. And human beings can endure incredible hardship when they know there's meaning on the other side of it. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, once observed that those who found meaning were often better able to endure unimaginable suffering. That idea has stayed with countless people because it speaks to something deeply human. When I coach people, I don't just want them to survive, I want them to discover why they're still here. Because if you're breathing, your story's not finished. And if your story isn't finished, God still has something He wants to do in and through your life. That's worth holding on to. So maybe the question isn't, why did this happen? Maybe the better question is, what kind of person is this season inviting me to become? Not forcing me to become, but inviting me. Because every season is an invitation. It's an invitation to become more patient, more courageous, more honest, more compassionate, more resilient. The invitation is there. The choice is ours. I don't know what you're carrying today, but I do know this. The worst day of your life does not get the final word. The worst decision you've ever made does not get the final word. The worst thing someone did to you does not get the final word. Those things become part of your story. They are not the author of it. And if you believe that, really believe that, you begin waking up with hope again. Not because life suddenly became easy, because you stopped handing yesterday the authority to determine tomorrow. That realization eventually led me to one final discovery, one that changed not only how I viewed resilience, but how I viewed success itself. Because I discovered something that completely surprised me. The people I admired most weren't necessarily the most successful, they were the most fulfilled. And those two things are not the same. You know, when I first started rebuilding my life, I thought success was going to be the finish line. I thought if I could build a business, earn respect, help enough people, make enough money, maybe then I'd finally feel like I had made it. Maybe then I'd feel like I escaped my past. But something unexpected happened. Every goal I reached was meaningful for about 5 minutes. Then my mind started chasing the next one, the next achievement, the next milestone, the next finish line. Have you ever noticed that? We spend months, sometimes years, working towards something, and the moment we finally arrive, our minds immediately start looking toward the next destination. There's nothing wrong with ambition. Ambition has built incredible things. But ambition by itself is a terrible place to build your identity because eventually you'll discover something. Achievement answers the question, what have I done? Fulfillment answers the question, who have I become? Those aren't the same conversation. When I look back now, the moments I'm most proud of aren't the ones most people would recognize. They're the quiet moments, the conversations where someone looked at me and said, I finally believe I can change. Watching someone forgive after carrying bitterness for years, seeing a marriage begin rebuilding after everyone else thought it was over, hearing someone say, for the first time in my life, I actually understand myself, those moments remind me why I'm here. Not because I'm changing people's lives, because I get to watch people discover that change and that it's been possible all along. That's one of the greatest privileges I could ever ask for. I've also realized something else. The most fulfilled people I've ever met all have one thing in common. Their lives eventually became bigger than themselves. They stopped asking, how can I become more successful? And they started asking, how can I become more useful? There's a difference. Success asks, what can I gain? Purpose asks, what can I give? One is centered on accumulation and the other is centered on contribution. And strangely enough, the people who contribute the most usually experience the deepest fulfillment. And it's not because their lives are easier, it's because they know why they get up in the morning. Maybe that's what resilience has really been teaching me all of these years. Resilience isn't about becoming someone life can never hurt. That's impossible. Life will hurt you. Life will surprise you. Life will disappoint you. No, resilience is becoming someone who refuses to let those moments steal your identity. It's becoming the kind of person who can walk through hardship without abandoning your values, without abandoning your faith, without abandoning your integrity, without abandoning your hope. Because once you lose those things, you've lost far more than circumstances could ever take from you. Earlier, I asked you a question. Have you ever made one decision and almost immediately knew your life was about to change? I have. That decision eventually led me to a jail cell. At the time, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd reached the chapter people would remember me for. The addict, the inmate, the man who wasted his life. I couldn't imagine there were more pages left to write. Looking back now, I realize I was wrong. That jail cell wasn't the end of my story. It was the end of one version of me. The man who believed he couldn't change. The man who believed his past had already determined his future. The man who confused his mistakes with his identity. That version of me had to end so another version could begin. Not a perfect man, not a finished man, just a man willing to keep becoming. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you're standing at that edge of a chapter you never wanted to live through. Maybe you're carrying regret. Maybe you're carrying shame. Maybe you're carrying disappointment. Maybe you're simply tired. If that's you, I want you to hear this. Your life is not measured by your worst day. Your identity is not determined by your greatest failure. And your future has not been canceled because of your past. Not unless you decide it has. There is still another page. There's still another chapter. There's still another decision waiting to be made. And that decision might become the one that changes everything. So here's the question I'd love for you to carry with you after this video ends. Not how do I fix my life, but who am I becoming? Because every conversation, every habit, every relationship, every challenge, every ordinary day is answering that question, whether you realize it or not. You're becoming someone. The only real question is it someone that you'll be grateful you became? Before we finish, I want to leave you with one thought too. If you're waiting until you feel confident, you'll probably be waiting a long time. If you're waiting until life becomes easy, you'll probably keep postponing the life that you're capable of living. If you're waiting until you know exactly how everything is going to work out, you may never begin. Instead, make one decision today. Not 10, one. One conversation, one apology, one workout, one prayer, one application, one honest moment, one act of forgiveness, one promise you'll actually keep. Don't underestimate what one decision can become. After all, one decision once led me to a jail cell. Another decision made thousands of ordinary days later led me here. The decisions weren't equally dramatic, but they were equally powerful. One moved my life in the wrong direction, the other slowly brought it back. And that's how transformation usually works. Not all at once, just one decision at a time. Thank you for spending all this time with me. My hope isn't that you leave this video feeling motivated because motivation fades. My hope is that you see yourself differently, because the moment you begin seeing yourself differently, you begin making different decisions. Different decisions create different habits. Different habits create a different life. And one day, you look back, not because you're amazed by everything that you accomplished, but because you're grateful for the person you became along the way. That's resilience. Not surviving a life, but becoming someone that life cannot easily shake. I'll see you in the next conversation.